Hey there! Ever seen the news that the government is blowing billions of dollars on something ridiculous while the country is drowning in debt? People got furious and panicked. But do you know almost every country on Earth is in debt? India, Germany, Switzerland, Saudi Arabia, even big nations like the United States, China, Japan, and Russia aren't safe from debt. Japan owes twice its entire economy, and the United States, a cool $36 trillion in debt and still counting. Sounds crazy, right? So, have you ever wondered why countries are in debt? Why don't they just print more money? Is debt really that bad? And if countries owe money, who are they borrowing from? And can a country be debt-free? So in this video, we will talk about all you need to know about the debt. Let's break it down. National debt is basically the total amount of money a government owes to creditors. Think of it like your credit card debt, but on a massive scale. When your government spends more money than it brings in through taxes and other revenue, it has to borrow the difference. This borrowed money adds up over time and becomes the national debt. There are two main types of debt here. First, there's public debt, money owed to external creditors like other countries, international organizations, or private investors. Then there's intragovernmental debt, money the government owes to itself, like when it borrows from social security funds or pension accounts. The debt is usually measured as a percentage of GDP, that's gross domestic product, which is the total value of everything a country produces. So when we say Japan's debt is twice its economy, we mean their debt is 200% of their GDP. That's a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're about to collapse. Countries borrow money for the same reasons you might take out a loan, to invest in things that will benefit them in the long run. So, governments need money to build infrastructure like roads, bridges, hospitals, and schools. These projects, well, they cost billions up front, but generate economic benefits for decades. During economic downturns, governments often borrow to stimulate the economy. They might cut taxes or increase spending to get people working and businesses running again. This is called fiscal policy, and it's actually one of the main tools governments use to fight recessions. Countries also borrow for emergencies, natural disasters, wars, pandemics. These events require massive spending that governments can't always cover with their regular income. The COVID-19 pandemic is a perfect example. Sometimes countries borrow simply because they can get better returns on investment than the interest they pay on their debt. If a country can borrow at 2% interest but invest in projects that generate 5% returns, that's actually profitable debt. This is where it gets interesting. Countries don't just walk into a bank and ask for a loan. They have several sources of funding, and each works differently. First, there are government bonds. These are basically IOUs that countries sell to investors. When you buy a government bond, you're lending money to that country in exchange for regular interest payments and your principal back when the bond matures. Anyone can buy these: individuals, pension funds, other countries, or even central banks. Then there are international organizations like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The IMF typically lends to countries facing financial crises, but their loans come with strict conditions. The borrowing country has to implement specific economic reforms and policies. So, the World Bank, it's primarily focused on development projects in poorer countries. It's, all about helping these nations grow and improve their infrastructure and services. Other countries, well, they're major lenders too. Take China, for example. It's become a huge creditor in recent years, especially with initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative. They lend money to developing countries for infrastructure projects, but there's been some controversy around this, particularly about the potential for debt traps. Now, commercial banks and private investors, they're in the game as well. They lend to countries, especially those wealthier ones with good credit ratings. These loans, they usually come with higher interest rates than government bonds, but they offer more flexibility. It's an interesting dynamic, really. This is probably the most misunderstood aspect of national debt. Debt isn't automatically good or bad. It depends on how it's used and managed. Good debt is debt that pays for itself over time. When a government borrows to build a highway, that highway generates economic activity, creates jobs, and makes the country more productive. The economic benefits often exceed the cost of borrowing. Same with education, healthcare, and research investments. So let's talk about bad debt. It's essentially borrowing for consumption or, inefficient projects. If a government, for instance, borrows billions for a bridge to nowhere or to fund excessive government salaries without really improving productivity, well, that's what we call problematic debt. Now, moving on to the ability to service debt. The key factor here is the country's capacity to handle its debt. What I mean is, can it make the interest payments and eventually pay back the principal? This really depends on the country's economic growth, how efficiently it collects taxes, and its overall financial stability. Some countries, believe it or not, handle high debt levels just fine. Take Japan, for example. They have debt that's over 200% of their GDP, but most of it is owned by Japanese citizens and institutions. The government can manage this because they have a strong economy and, importantly, their own currency. Other countries with much lower debt levels have faced crises because they borrowed in foreign currencies or just couldn't collect enough taxes to service their debt. Technically, yes, a country can be debt-free, but honestly, it's not necessarily desirable. Norway is actually one of the rare examples of a country with net positive wealth, and that's thanks to their massive oil fund. They've saved so much money from oil revenues that, well, their assets actually exceed their debts. But even Norway still issues some government bonds because it helps maintain their financial markets. Most economists actually don't recommend being completely debt-free. Some level of government debt is healthy for an economy. Government bonds provide safe investment options for pension funds and insurance companies. The real goal isn't to eliminate debt, but to keep it at sustainable levels. This means debt should grow slower than the economy, and the government should be able to service its debt without compromising essential services or economic growth. Countries can reduce their debt through several methods. Economic growth, running budget surpluses, selling government assets, or in extreme cases, debt restructuring or default. But, complete elimination is rarely the target. So, in conclusion, debt is actually a double-edged sword. Used wisely, it can help your country to grow and thrive, but, if it's used recklessly, it can lead to a financial blunder. So, next time you hear someone ask, "Why is our country in debt?" then you already know the answer. And honestly, it's not really about debt itself, it's about knowing how to manage it. And also, maybe you're still wondering why some countries handle high debt just fine while others collapse in, well, other things about debt. Maybe that's for another video because we're out of time. If you want me to make another video explaining these topics, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.